Greetings, traveler.
Let's take a look at all the new elemental cards that have been revealed today. For our first lesser trinket, we have Demon Blood Gourd. Spellcraft, choose a friendly minion, and then you can eat a minion from the shop and gain the stats. You could really compare this to a Mind Muck, where you get to throw this on something that's not a demon. Now the downside is that you can sell a Mind Muck. This is a spellcraft, so you're not really getting the extra gold. So if I'm saying that out loud, get one Mind Muck per turn that you can't sell. Nah, I'm not super impressed by this. Now, if you happen to have a really good start where you can buff the shop and you know for certain, let's say you've tripled into an Azurite or anything along the likes, then this becomes a lot better, of course. But if there is no indication that you're going to be able to buff the shop, this feels very mediocre. And even at 1 gold, I'm not too happy to pick it up. Darnassus Pie. This is also 1 gold. Minions in the tavern have +1/+1 for each minion you've sold this turn. This also feels a little tricky to use because you have to sell a lot of units, and early in the game you definitely don't want to be doing that. You want to save some more gold, you want to be able to level. Maybe there is some kind of a strategy here where you go to tier 4 and then you sell like 3 or 4 units that turn and you get a big buff and you get a tempo spike because of that. Perhaps if people can figure out a strategy like that where you don't lose too much tempo early, it can work. Right now I think it's a little tricky to make this good. Felblut Portrait, on the other hand, looks very straightforwardly good. You get a slimy Felblut when you activate this, which is crazy because it costs 4 gold and it's going to give you a minion that you would happily buy for 3 gold. So with that in mind, it essentially costs you 1 gold to activate this effect. Now your Fiery and Slimy Felbluts give attack and health. That's really good because how many times have you played with a bunch of Firies or a bunch of Slimies and then you just have damage or you just have health and it's good, but it's not quite great. Now you'll just get both and you can add something like Titus later on to double the effectiveness of your Fiery, or if you have a Slimy next to a Rylak and you're just buffing a ton. So yeah, this feels like a no-brainer. This one looks really good. Dalaran Cheese Wheel, 4 gold as well. Minions in the tavern have +1/+1. Upgrades every 3 times you refresh. Intuitively, this feels like something I would take if I have Malchezaar on the board and I can just do a bunch of rolls for free. I think it's a little bit too slow if I have to do a bunch of rolling. Again, early on, we don't really want to spend a lot of gold either selling units or refreshing the tavern. We most of the time want to make the most of what's in the shop. I'm not the biggest fan of this. This feels a little bit too slow. Again, unless I have a Malchezaar. If I have a Malchezaar, then I'm getting a bunch of rolls for free, and then this obviously becomes quite good. Primordial Terrarium. Every time you play an elemental, your next tavern spell costs 1 less. So I think this one is entirely dependent on whether it stacks or not. If this stacks, which I would assume so based off the wording, costing 1 less every time, this looks great. I think this opens up APM avenues where you're playing Elementals and Tavern Tempests with a Bran, and then you get a Chef's Choice for 0, and then you chef an Elemental, and you get another Elemental, and pop, 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 just go, 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 go. So this looks like a lot of fun where it sets you up for an APM game. Nomi sticker. Well, this is just Nomi's effect, but for those of you who've never seen Nomi, which I guess there's a few of you by now, Nomi used to be is a tier 5 minion, where if you play an elemental, your shop elementals grow by +1/+1. So now you're going to have that effect, but the big bonus here is that you do not have to keep a board slot for Nomi. Before, you would have, Nomi was a 4/4, so if you keep a Nomi on your board, that's a really weak minion for the combat, and sometimes you would have to sell your Nomi. If you didn't want to die, then you have to buy another huge elemental. Now, chat hates that moment, so this is great. Now you can just keep Nomi forever, and you don't have to feel bad about it because you're not losing any tempo. So I think that's a really fun solution to that problem, and I think on 8 gold, right, you would have to imagine that's sort of like tripling into a 5-drop, tripling into a Nomi. That's pretty much on point. So for a lesser trinket, this is essentially just get a Nomi for free and it doesn't take a board slot, so I like that. Kodo Letter Pouch is 2 gold. After you buy a card, give a random friendly minion +2/+1. This you can compare a little bit. Well, not really, it's not a fair comparison because this is a lesser trinket, but still, you have to think about something like a Moon Eater or a Greymane. Now they will be removed from the game, but you could think about that in terms of how much work those cards do. Every time you play an odd or an even card, depending on what you're doing, you're, let's say, putting +6/+6 on your board. Here, if you buy a card, you're getting +2/+1 on a random unit. It's not going to hold up when it comes to playing around this trinket. There's a bigger version of it as well, and it's a bit stronger, but still, I don't think you're gaining enough stats to really just play around it. So I think when you pick this, it's more of a random little bonus, and you're still really trying to push towards a different direction. Whereas, you know, let's say with the Nomi sticker, you can play around this. This trinket gives you a game plan, whereas this trinket will just give you a little bit of a boost, and then you will have to just figure out what you do after that. Lava Lamp. This reminds me of the tier 5 trumpet guy, the guy that gives you an elemental after you've sold like 5. That was really good, but you needed a lot of them to go infinite. So you can only ever have, well, I guess no, we'll have to look at the greater ones as well. But at least early on, you only have one of these, right? So you can't really get more value. So let's say you're selling 4 minions. Realistically, you're selling 3 because you're getting an elemental, right? And that elemental is then a minion you can sell. So realistically, you'd have to buy 3 and sell 3, and every time then you get an elemental, right? Because the elemental can be sold as well. That's not bad if you're doing something like Brand, Tavern Tempest, Elemental, and then you're trying to get Rock on your board to get massive buffs. So it's an investment in the future, right? You're not getting an immediate return out of this. You really need to get something like Brand and then be able to cycle Tavern Tempests and just in general battle cries that are easy to buy, like let's say General Drakaseth or Murozond. You can just buy that, get a bunch of cards, sell. Oh, here's an elemental, I have a rock, I get the buffs. So really good if you have that kind of a setup, and very mediocre if not. For greater trinkets, we have Darnassus Pie, the upgraded version, or rather the greater trinket version. Minions in the tavern now have +2/+2 for each minion you've sold this turn. When we're later in the game and it's much easier to just buy and sell, I like this more. But you really need to have something like a Felbor or other synergy to be able to eat the shop. Otherwise, this is just not good enough. Maybe for magnetics, right? You could argue if you have 2 Deflectobots and you're just buying and selling and then buffing some magnetics to make huge Deflectobots, maybe. But by and large, I think this is something that you want to play if you have a reliable way of eating the shop. So Felbat, Felbor, those kind of cards. Azurite Portrait. Get a living Azurite, and your living Azurites also give stats to friendly elementals. So this is turn 9. That's the second 10 gold turn. Intuitively, it's a little late to be happy to find an Azurite at that point. If you're already in full swing, full Azurite mode and buffing, sure, then let's go, right? Let's add this. I get another Azurite, and now when I play a spell, not only does my shop get buffed, my board also gets buffed, so it's a little bit easier to keep weaker cards like the Azurites, or even just make my triples bigger, right? If I have a pair on the board, I can buff that, buy the triple from the shop, which is also bigger with the buffs. Very situational, but I don't think you ever start going into Azurite when you hit this. You really need to have an Azurite setup, and then you pick this, and then, you know, fine. Sure, we can go with it. Dalaran Cheese Wheel is also upgraded, so 4 gold, but now you have +2/+2 for every 3 times you roll. Very similar, right? We need to have ways to eat the shop, and preferably have Malchezaar or any other way that we can get extra rerolls. Jart Frostling. So this is a new effect. Start of the combat, give 2 friendly elementals a death rattle. Summon a Flourishing Frostling. My initial thought is that this is amazing for combat, because a Frostling, if you don't know, is an aura buff. So this is not affected by something like Bramble Witch, or even just like summoning it. It doesn't summon as a 1/1 or a 2/1 or whatever. It'll summon with all the stats it would have if you would just buy it in the shop, assuming you haven't buffed the shop and it's just the pure elemental buff. So that's pretty good at winning fights, assuming you've been playing a lot of elementals, which, you know, we assume we are if we're considering this. So yeah, I like this because you're getting some tempo from getting this right away. And especially in a game where you're already doing really well, this really plays around scam. So if your opponent has Leroy or Bramble Witch, it's much easier to not lose to that because you now have 2 additional units for 9 total rather than the 7. Kodo Letter Pouch also has an upgrade. You're getting +4/+4 every time you buy a card. Again, if we compare that to the Greymane Moon Eater angle, you're still only getting +4/+4 instead of the +6/+6 you would be getting if you're playing Greymane Moon Eater, and this is on a random minion, so it could technically go on something you want to sell soon. Not really a fan. So again, I think this is just something you get if you really don't like the other ones and you say, well, at least this will just give me some buffs. I can't use the other two because they might have some prerequisite, like for instance, if you get over to Azerite, but you're not in Azerite, I'm not sure exactly how that will work, if that happens at all or not. But then you might just go with this and say, well, at least I get some benefit. But not a big fan, and I think it's pretty hard to really play around this. Shaman Prayer Beats, on the other hand, you can definitely play around. After you buy 2 Battlecry minions, get a random Battlecry minion. So what this means is every time you buy 2 Battlecries, you get another Battlecry in the hand. So this really opens up APM type strategies. You definitely need a brand for this. And then you just probably something like a Rock that you can play and just cycle a lot of Battlecries. A lot of Battlecries are gold neutral, something like a Shell Collector, assuming you have brand, of course, Shell Collector, Murozond, Drakasat. So those are all Battlecries that you could just easily buy, and then you just get extra Battlecries. So you're generating 1 gold from a Battlecry that you can sell, and especially if you have a brand, that Battlecry might yield much more than 1 gold. So yeah, this is absolutely something that I want to try play with because it's going to open up some APM type strategy. Big Nomi! After you play an elemental, elementals in the tavern have +2/+2 this game. So I'm assuming that if you started off with a regular Nomi and then you also hit Big Nomi, that's just a lot of fun because now you're getting +3/+3 to elementals in the tavern every time you play an elemental, and you do not have to keep any of these on your board. The Nomi stickers are your trinkets, and your trinkets don't take up board space. So yeah, this looks like a lot of fun, and obviously this is something you can only really take if you were already buffing elementals in the shop. It's too slow to start buffing elementals on turn 9, unless you have some godlike setup where you're super strong and you can pivot, and you already have Bran, and you can play lots of elementals and Tavern Tempest, but for most games, you really want to pick this when you've already been buffing elementals. New cards. We have Bountiful Bedrock. It's a tier 3 elemental. At the end of every 2 turns, you get a random elemental. That seems quite good to pick up early. The turn itself will count towards it, so that means that if you buy this, at the end of next turn, you will get a random elemental in your hand. So especially early on, when you just need to fill your board, this seems like a nice card to fill it with, to then hopefully get something like an Azerite or anything else that allows you to get more value, or maybe even just a Elemental for extra gold. So usually early extra gold is quite nice. Sleeping Sea Glass has a choose 1 effect, which is not a battle cry. So that means it does not work with Bran, which is probably good because it says double this minion's attack or health. So where this really shines is when you've been buffing the shop a ton and then you buy a big one from the shop. You play it, and then you can most of the time double its health, sometimes attack if you feel like that's better. And then the real payoff happens when you have 2 big ones and then you triple it. And then you play the golden one. The golden one is already huge, and then you get triple the health of, yeah, that's like really nice. Absolutely a great payoff for when you've been buffing the shop already, which elementals is something that's really something they want to do. This really seems like a good end game target to say, okay, what do I do now? Oh, I just hunt more Sleeping Sea Glass and I try to just triple, because that's where the huge value comes in. You have 2 big ones already and then you just triple. Awesome name for this one, Moss of the Schloss. I just like saying that. When another friendly elemental dies, gain its maximum stats. So this is pure tempo, right? This is not permanent. It just says once per combat. So if a friendly elemental dies, you now gain the max stats. That gives you some incentive to taunt a big elemental. You have to be a little bit careful for Bramblewitch in that case, because then you nerf the minion and the Schloss does not get a lot of stats. But especially if you have something like Frostling. If you have Frostling on your board and it's taunted, it is not really affected by that Bramblewitch. So that seems like an excellent combo. Moss of the Schloss usually will have some stats already, because if you've been buffing the shop, this is now going to be a 3/4, and then you have a taunted Frostling that dies, and that's just a lot of tempo. Not something that looks like super late game, although I guess if you have the golden one and you gain double the stats, no, that is still pretty good. Yeah, I can definitely see playing around it, where especially if you have a Sleeping Sea Glass and you somehow have that die first, a golden big one, and then you have a golden Moss of the Schloss. Yeah, there's absolutely some shenanigans available here. We also have some changed minions. First up, we have Wildfire going from a tier 3 to a tier 4. This is most likely because it would be a little bit too easy to triple Wildfire if it would be on tier 3. Now, there's also just the chance that because they added some tier 3 elementals, something needs to go and it needs some space, but I think it's a good idea regardless, because there is a lot of elemental support right now where you can buff the shop, and if it's easy to make golden Wildfires, the elemental endgame might be a little bit too good, because this thing is a phenomenal golden card when it's big. Landlubber is now going to a tier 3, so a little bit more towards its roots, not quite a tier 2, which it was when it got released, but that is because the Azurite is being moved to tier 4. Now, this is probably also because of duos. In duos, the whole meta revolves around tripling into Azurite early or rolling an Azurite early and then feeding your partner a bunch of spells so they can make huge elementals and then send those huge elementals back to you. And that's a very, very powerful, might even say oppressive strategy in duos. So partially probably because of that, and also because there's a lot of elemental support now. So again, if Azurite is on 3, it's a little bit easy to triple it and just get a lot of value. And then we also have 2 removed elementals. Magmalock was back for a little bit and now it's gone again. And then Marine Matriarch is also out. These are most likely just changes because some new elementals were added and they need some space. So some elementals have to go and these 2 were chosen. Not a big deal. That was it for all the revealed elemental cards. Make sure to tune in tomorrow for demons and mechs.